Welcome to another episode of Just More Fix. This is James. With me in this episode is Lacey.
Hey.
You can find us online at justmorefix.com or on Twitter at justmorefix. If you like us, you can support us at Patreon, and you can give us a rating and review at iTunes or wherever you find us at. In this episode, we're going to talk about using Microscope as a GM tool. And now, it's time to get our gaming fix.
I'm Lindsay.
I'm Austin.
And I'm Joe from PopXcast,
A podcast member of the Gonna Geek Network.
Just like the show you're listening to now.
The opinions expressed are those of each individual host.
Check out all the other podcasts at GonnaGeekNetwork.com.
And get ready because geekiness begins in
3,
2,
1.
Welcome to another episode of Just More Fix. A couple quick announcements here before we get things started. HoosierCon, just want to give a quick plug for that again. If you guys are going to be in the Indianapolis area in March, I believe it's 23rd, 24th, and 25th, if I'm not mistaken.
It's the end of March.
Hopefully we'll see you guys there if you are in the Indianapolis area. And you can go to HoosierGamers.com. That's who's like who, as in a person, WHOS, gamers.com, to see, no, your hat. That's who's, WHOSYER, HoosierGamers.com. I'll link that in the show notes. And if you're going to be in the Indianapolis area in March, hopefully we will see you guys there. We're in the process of putting together our games now and getting them put up there on the event manager. And hopefully we can see you guys there and play some games with you guys.
Even if you're not going to the convention, Who's Your Gamers has a Twitter feed. So you should follow them if you're local so that you can know about other cool gaming things that they put on and do during the year.
Yeah, it's very true. And Who's Your Gamers is an awesome organization that focuses on just spreading gaming, both board games, any kind of tabletop gaming, essentially. They give away a lot of games and that kind of stuff, and they work in the greater Indianapolis area. So they're an awesome organization and a good group to support. So we had a great time there last year. So the second quick announcement is that our work on the Troubadours continues, and we had our second playtest over the weekend and had a really good time. It was I was much more relaxed running it, and things went really smooth. Only a few small changes to come out of it this time, and I think it's getting honed down pretty good. And I'm planning to run it at our next Indie RPG Day in January in Terre Haute. So if you're in the area and you want to come check it out, we'll hope to see you there. We don't have a date set for that one yet, but it'll be coming. And if you are interested in how the playtests go, right now I'm sort of writing blog articles and tracking the progress of the development of the game so far as it goes on our Patreon, which is linked on our main Just More Fix webpage. And if you are a Patreon supporter, you can go there and get the game aids and the actual playbooks and stuff as along the way. So if you are interested in that, head over to Patreon and check it out. Our last announcement is that we are nominated for the Best RPG Podcast for 2018. Yeah, on Morris's unofficial EN World Tabletop RPG News website. So the poll should be closing tomorrow for us as we record this, and the large poll to see who will win should go up, and I will link that in the show notes. And we'd appreciate some Just More Fix love from you guys out there. So if you like us, go vote for us. And if you don't like us, well, go vote for us anyway. And if you can vote for more people, then absolutely show some love to your favorite podcast out there. And
Your second favorite podcast.
Yeah, of course.
Your third favorite, fourth favorite.
All the other favorites, right on. All right, so we are going to talk about Microscope today, and we already have reviewed the regular Microscope game. If you don't know what Microscope is, it is a sort of world-building game, and we reviewed it quite some time ago, so if you go through our review list, you'll see it in the list there if you want to have a more in-depth review of what Microscope is. But fundamentally, Microscope is a sort of collaborative storytelling game where you get to sort of build an era, and then there's an expansion to it, which is Microscope Explorer, where you can sort of focus in a little bit on different kinds of things, right?
You're building a history, not an era.
Okay, yeah.
There could be several eras within your history, but I think there's actually more than one expansion, and I know there were plans to make some of these smaller ones that are included in the Microscope Explorer into standalone books. So cool. I don't know where the process is with that, though. Okay. But I think there are at least one other book besides this one that is like standalone.
Okay.
But for the purpose of what we're doing here, we did the Microscope Chronicle at Game on Sunday. So that's kind of what we're going to focus on. What's different is that Chronicle is the story of a single thing rather than, so like with regular Microscope, you set your palette, which includes the things you definitely want to talk about and definitely don't want to include in your history that you're creating. And then it's very freeform and you can kind of go absolutely anywhere from there. With Chronicle, you say, okay, well, we're going to do that, but everything has to be related in some way to this one thing. So that thing could be a city, it could be an artifact.
Could it be a person?
This says political movement. I don't think it can be maybe, but generally, like Microscope tends to be more broad than the single lifespan of one human.
Right.
There is a version called Union, which focuses on a family. So like the what's the Popey family? The Borgias. You could focus on the entire Borgia line before he became Pope, like his ancestors up through, maybe the future and explore that. Or King Henry the umpteenth-thousandth. You can go from King Henry the First to the 1 billionth and like examine that family line or whatever,
Right on.
And then there is another version that we haven't really messed with at all either called Echo, which looks at alternate histories and time travel. It's supposedly the most complicated version, which it sounds like a solid assessment since Ben Robbins is the one that said that was the case and he made the game. So
right on.
I take his word for it.
Fair enough.
But yeah, so we did Chronicle. Like I said, it's not very different. So there's that small tweak that everything is focused on one thing. So for our particular session, we chose an artifact. I had originally kind of talked to Simon about this because he works at the gaming store where we run the games, and he frequently participates in our indie RPG days. And he was very interested in trying a Microscope game. He said he'd kind of given it a shot at home with a couple players, but nobody really knew the rules like all that well. And it sounded like it didn't turn out quite the way that he had wanted to.
And to be fair, it's a very freeform game. Yeah. So there aren't many hard rules to the game. And one of the things that I noticed as we played it was that if you don't sort of stay adhering to those rules and have someone there to sort of keep you on track, it's real easy to lose track of what you're doing and wander off to something that isn't related to what you're like the moment in time that you're creating, basically. And that's something that I struggle with, because then I was blending in things that I had been thinking about while it was someone else's turn, and then wanting to jump ahead and then realizing, oh, I'm not supposed to do that. So I do think that it is a game that has a very loose structure to it, but you need to have someone there to sort of maintain that structure. Otherwise, I think the game can really fall apart. Now, it's not going to be, sounds like it's going to be hard to do, but it's really not. It's very, very easy because it's very straightforward.
Yeah, there's only like 4 or 5 rules,
right?
Which is why they're so important to follow.
Right. And when you're doing something that is so free form and collaborative storytelling, it is really easy to wander away from the structure of the game, which it is sort of the way Microscope works. It allows you to sort of gradually create this world collaboratively, and your ideas build on top of one another to sort of make this, like, I don't know, awesome mosaic. Because like there's a piece of everyone's creativity in it, and there are things that I would have never put in there, and then they came in, and I was like, this is really cool. And then I was able to sort of take their idea and mold it a little bit with my own, twists and things, and then there's sort of continuous back and forth. And we played with 5 people, and I felt like it worked really well. Now, I think after 5, I think it would probably, if you were at 6 players, it would get a little cumbersome, and it would take too long to come around. And by the time it got around to you, things may have changed too much for what you had in mind. So I think 5 is probably the upper limit of where I think it really works. And at 5, it worked great for us. We had a really amazing time doing it.
And I think that's why. First, I think this was probably the most fun that I've had with Microscope in the times that we have. I don't know. Do you still say run the game, played the game? Because you're not really like one person running it.
No, I think it's playing the game.
Ideally, once everybody knows the rules, it's kind of everyone refereeing each other. But when one person has a better understanding of what's allowed and what's not, then that person is kind of acting as referee just to make sure everybody stays on track. But,
well, even in your GM-less games, like regular, more traditional style GM-less RPGs, I think it's important to have someone who knows the rules a little better to sort of not run the game, but sort of keep it on track.
Right.
Like a facilitator, more or less.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I think that's why this works so well as a GM tool, though, is that collaboration, because now you're fleshing out your initial ideas with other people's ideas that you would not have come up with on your own. So you're kind of injecting a big dose of creativity into what you're doing. So I think it's really especially cool. I think the reason why it worked so well this time is because we were using it with a group of people that we don't know quite as well.
Right.
And when you use it at your home table, you definitely don't know what everyone's going to come up with. But, we've been gaming together for a long time.
Yeah, and I think we're
and we know each other outside of the gaming world, too.
We were acclimated to each other's sort of creative sensibilities. So I can kind of, I may not know exactly what you're going to do, but I can kind of anticipate a little bit. And I think that doing it with someone who you don't know, who is essentially a stranger, more or less, right? That you don't know exactly where they're going to come from on certain things and the connections that they might make and all this kind of stuff. And I think it adds assuming that everybody comes to the table to have a good time, in which they should, and create a collaborative story. I think that you might actually get more out of it by having creative voices that you're not accustomed to there.
Mm-hmm. The other thing I like about the Chronicle is that it's an easy sell to your D&D group, because D&D players are intimately familiar with the idea of the awesome epic artifact.
Right. So you could do Vecna's Hand.
Right. And so we did our own artifact from a previous game that we'd had called the Antonius Vault, which nobody else at the table was familiar with, but I gave them the basics of what, the artifact, essentially, like a 2 or 3 sentence summary of what we knew about the artifact at this point. Right. And then we created that history. But you could very easily do it with any artifact from D&D and have people kind of instantly on board. And so you're like, okay, well, this is, what we know thus far, and we're going to kind of explore where this came from, where else it's been up until this point.
Right.
And I think when you're doing that, you kind of have to set a few harder lines on the palette as far as how closely you want to follow the established fiction of the game, because, you may have somebody who's really, really familiar with it and somebody else who's not.
Right. Well, I think, so the palette, the way it works is it's a hard series of yeses and nos. So yes, this, no, that. So in our case, it was yes, vampires, no time travel. Yes, ghosts, no. What was another no?
Dragons.
No dragons, right? So if you were going to do like the Hand of Vecna, right, you could say that yes can be very big. So one of your yeses could be yes, Forgotten Realms, right? No, Dark Sun, or whatever. I think if you intentionally use that palette to sort of hone things in and focus it, you can make yes or no questions that cover a lot of information, just as simple as yes, Forgotten Realms. And that implies a lot of things, right?
And there is a mechanic in there for during the game as well, because normally it's kind of freeform, whatever that person wants to do. But there's a mechanic for something called pushing, which allows you to kind of say, wait a second, I'm not okay with that. Let's discuss it and then take a vote, basically, about it.
Right.
So that's there if you want to do a more consistent fiction.
Right.
So how long did it was probably 2 hours,
2 hours,
hour and a half to
thereabout.
2 hours.
Yeah.
And so we made it through 3 full rounds with 5 people. So one round starts with your first player as the lens. They choose a focus. They pick a couple things. Everybody goes around completely. Then they pick one more thing, and then the person next to them creates a legacy and creates either a period event or scene again. And then it switches to round 2, and the same thing happens again in a circle. So you have basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 creation rounds essentially within this one major round.
So one of the things that I found to be kind of a fun surprise for me was the Antonius Vault in the games that we had played was a sort of weird chalice that existed in the world of darkness, where you could sort of put souls or blood into it to see the future, right? And it had a connection to the Shadowlands and to necromancy and Giovanni and some other stuff, right? So that was baggage that I sort of came into the game with, and this is, we didn't say it had to be in the world of darkness, but our palette was structured in a way to it kind of fit into that a little bit.
We did choose gothic horror, vampires, and ghosts, and then someone added golems, which I thought was an interesting
So this is where
addition.
I was going to go, is initially when the golems got added to it, I thought, I don't really care for the golems thing, but whatever, if that's what you want to see in there, that's fine with it. I'm not, it's not like a hard no, like, this is a boundary that I have. It's just I didn't see how it fit in there creatively initially, right? So then we played the game and things are progressing and the story is growing and building. And we have sort of set up this war between ghosts and vampires, right? And the golem part of it hadn't come into play yet. And then the person at the table with us who had said, I want golems in here, led into this thing where the golems were actually built from...
Well, I think you have to say first that we had originally envisioned a chalice.
Yeah.
So I had always kind of wondered why it was called the Antonius Vault when it was a cup. So I decided during the game to make an actual full-size vault that then is destroyed and created into a chalice. So then you have these leftover remnants of the vault. And then thus...
Right. So then the bricks are taken and they are able to be formed into these golems, which are the stones of the vault. When it's destroyed is sort of possessed by ghosts, basically. And that's what becomes a golem. And that's the physical manifestation of the ghosts on the planet
or in the world.
The
coolest version of a golem I've ever heard
of. And I agree.
Of
and I was like, oh, this is really cool because you have a finite amount of these things that can be made and who is possessing them and all this stuff. And I think it added a lot of really interesting questions. And this is something that I would have said out the gate if you suggested, hey, let's put golems in this. I would have said, no, I don't like that. I don't think that fits very well. And then in the moment with creativity and people talking about things and brainstorming and stuff, it came out at the table. And I was like, this is a really awesome aspect of the game or aspect of this world we're creating here. And I would have never put that in there myself. And it changed things a little bit. And it really made me sort of reevaluate not process isn't the right word, but like sort of like using this as a tool to build things. It really made, I've always liked Microscope already, right? And I like how it does this collaborative storytelling thing and all that. And I think it's a great way to sort of flesh out a world for your players to explore and understand the history of it. But what it really made me see was that interesting ways that your creative process can come together to create things that you wouldn't think that you would normally put in there or enjoy, and then realize, oh, this is a really cool idea, but it came from somewhere that I wouldn't have started from initially.
Right.
It's kind of like a really roundabout way to get there, which is sort of how I came around to liking the idea of golems anyway, so I suppose it fits. But it just... I really like the idea of being sort of fast and loose with things and seeing what can come out of it and then going from there, right?
Right. Yeah.
And in this case, we focused on creating an artifact, but in fact, we ended up creating essentially an entire world.
Well, you're still creating a history, so that involves lots of locations and NPCs. It's just much more focused than the original Microscope. So significantly less broad, which I think actually lends it to being a GM tool better than the original Microscope itself because it is more focused.
Well,
not that you couldn't accomplish that with the original Microscope, but it just kind of makes it a little easier. But that being said, the thing I always find surprising about when we play Microscope is I go in thinking, okay, well, this will be cool, but probably like an hour
and
we'll
really
be fine.
A fun game?
No, not. I think it's fun, but like, I wonder, like, is it going to be fun after an hour? Is there still going to be anything left to look at? And I find every time that we do it that I leave the table with more questions than, when we started. Like, how can there still be so much left,
Well,
and it's because those other ideas spark more ideas.
I think that idea right there, that concept right there is what makes this such a great gaming tool. So one of the problems with so many games or so much work that GMs put into games is that you might have all these really cool and great ideas, and then you sort of build a world around them, and then you sort of cut your players loose to explore the world, right? But they never really encounter them, and then you have all these cool creative things that you've put in the game, and maybe the players turn left when you thought they might turn right, and now they walk away from all this really cool stuff that you put together. Whereas in this case, if we've all sat down to build this world collaboratively, even if they consciously choose to go left instead of right at whatever decision point there is, at least they know what they're turning away from, and they can make that choice on their own. And I really don't have problems with like a choice at a meta level that, hey, we know all this other cool stuff. This decision, if we go this way in the story, will lead us to all this really cool stuff we kind of know about as players in what we did in Microscope, and we kind of explore that even more. I'm totally okay with that because it leads to more interesting story, right?
Yeah. And everybody seems to be super concerned about metagaming, right? And I think that probably, first of all, largely depends on the players that you have at the table. But when it comes to story point meta things, it can be super fun as a player to encounter something that is familiar from another game that like, okay, my character would have no idea what this is. But as a player, I know what it is. And I think it is wicked cool that it's here. And, maybe I wasn't expecting to see it. So, we kind of ran into that in some of our World of Darkness games that you ran where there's like recurring NPCs from a different game. So I rolled over somebody from our Dark Ages game and now it's in this completely different modern game, but I've heard the name before and now I'm like, oh no, it's a little bit ominous and it's really interesting and adds a certain level of intrigue that would not have been there.
Right. Well, then the other thing I like and enjoy about that is when I bring those characters forward in time, you have all this knowledge as a player of what that character was initially, right? But in timeline, that's where we've moved ahead a couple hundred years or whatever it is. So who is this person become now that all this time has gone by and what has happened to them and how have they changed? And I think that's kind of a cool thing at a meta level as well as a player to explore and experience when you're seeing and discovering how they might react differently to what you're doing. You have this sort of expectation of who they are and what they're going to do. Mm-hmm. And then you're surprised by the fact that, oh, they're not doing this. Well, then why aren't they doing this? I know this person to be have a brutal temper and be a terrible brute, right? And maybe they're not now. So why is that? Why are they different? Are they, what has changed this person so much, right? Mm-hmm. So kind of circling back around to the initial point, though, was that it leaves more questions than answers every time you play it, right? So the goal of this, if you're going to make this artifact, right, for whatever game it is, you're going to explore the origins of the Hand of Vecna or the Antonius Fault or whatever it is you're going to use to make, right? No matter how much you play Microscope, you will always have more questions than answers. So when you're done, whether you choose that your game starts at some point inside the bookends of the Microscope game, then you might have some answers. But if your game starts outside of those bookends, right, then you have even more questions. Mm-hmm. So I think no matter how far you drill down into Microscope or which version of it you use, you're always going to have more questions when you're done. And those are the questions that I think that you should center your game around. And you might even add another phase to the Microscope thing. When you decide as a table, we're done with this Microscope phase of this game, what do each of us think is the most interesting aspect of what we've created here to explore as a traditional RPG?
You don't even have to do that because it's already done for you in the game. Like each person creates a legacy, which is the one thing within the game that they want to take another look at. So it's done. You look up, their name is on it, and each person has a, one or two word thing that says, this is what I found interesting. This is what I want to learn more about. And it's there. Right.
And then it's just a matter of deciding, depending on how far apart some of those things are, which ones do we want to sort of draw together? What themes can we kind of draw from these things and whatever? Right, I completely forgot about that. Very cool. So was there anything specific that surprised you about this Chronicle version of Microscope as opposed to the regular version of Microscope?
I didn't really know that there was anything that... Oh, well, I guess the other thing that's different for Chronicle is that every time you add the first event to a period of time, you create a person who represents that period of time. So it's kind of like instant NPC creation.
Right.
Which is an interesting aspect as well. And that's not something that the other game uses. I don't really know that I can say it's surprising because I read the rules so that I knew that was going to happen. But
yeah, I know what you're saying.
But it's a cool extra thing, right?
I know for me, the first unintended consequence that happened because of doing this was I enjoy regular Microscope and we've done it a couple of times and I've had a good time, but it's hard for me because it's so broad. It's hard for me to sort of narrow things down because when I'm narrowing down something that broad, I feel like I'm really just chopping off different choices, huge chunks at a time. And it bothers me sometimes because I'm like, well, I might want to use that later. I don't want to just cut that whole chunk off, right? And whereas with this, when it's more focused, since I feel like I felt like since the initial part of it was more focused, that it allowed me more, it put me at ease creatively so I could sort of sit back and just, come up with something and not have to be in such an open space that I could, kind of drew my focus a little bit. I don't know how to say that or whatever, but does it make any sense?
I think so. Yeah. Kind of worried about the possibilities that you're not pursuing, Right.
And then it's so big, how do you draw any focus in, these huge time periods or whatever, this huge epic of a thing, you know?
I think it's funny because what you said about like being afraid to just lop things off or whatever reminded me. And there's actually this Microscope Explorer book has the 3 new versions of the game, Union, Chronicle, and Echo. Right. Mm-hmm. But the whole front is like clarification about rules in Microscope and ways to improve your play of Microscope. And so there's a heading called Start with Nuking Atlantis. And it kind of talks about like just that, like, don't be afraid to make a big event that just like destroys something that someone else has created, because you're creating a history. And at any point in time, you can go back before that happened or after it happened. Like, you're not really destroying anything because you can time travel and go right back to where whatever that was started and explore there some more. So it's not really, unless you are discluding it from your palette or, cutting off with a bookend to where we're not going to go any farther back than this, it's not really gone.
Well, I guess, so maybe I framed that up a little bit wrong. Then I think really what it comes down to is when you first start and you sit down at Microscope, regular Microscope, right? And you're at the table and there's just 2 bookends on the table. Mm-hmm. I feel like I don't know what to put in there because there's just it's so wide open, right? And maybe it's not necessarily about what you don't choose and what you do choose. It's just so big. There's no way for me to draw a focus down. I need something to sort of focus me. And I realized when we sat down to do this one, the only difference is we had 2 bookends and then a little table tent that said the Antonius Fault. And wow, it's 2 words, but it very clearly draws your attention to say that whatever you're going to do, it doesn't matter. You can do anything you want, but it has to relate to this Antonius Fault. And that simple piece of it right there made it so much easier for me to do something because it drew me in. And I thought, well, now it's like, how creative can I be to draw out something that is sort of tangentially related to this Antonius Fault thing, but not just the vault itself, right? And it's sort of like, well, not to terrible pun or whatever, but to draw the focus down in this game, right, into something that was a little more tangible and sort of give you just that little bit of direction was huge for me. And I think a lot of people will probably benefit from it because it is so big and wide open. It's hard to sort of, where do you want to go? And then with regular Microscope, as the game goes by, I feel like it gets easier then because then there's more and more things to draw inspiration from and to build on. So, because you don't even have a foundation yet, or, with regular Microscope, it's so big.
You have the seed.
Yeah.
Which gives you, if you're more specific with that initial statement or question, then it's going to be, a little bit easier to kind of get things started.
Right.
But yeah, you're kind of relying on your own creativity and the creativity of others to spark enough of a thing initially for you to be able to draw off of. So it can be a little bit scary and a little bit intimidating.
Right. It's like, well, where do we go? I don't know. And I'm really okay with about anything, but I'm like, where do we start? I don't know where to start.
Yeah, especially if you're the first person that's going, like you're the first lens. And
so then when you do your thing and everybody's like, oh, really?
What are we going to focus on?
Space
I'd like
Marines
to
again?
Focus on the Chevy Buick for this round.
Yeah. Like, come on.
What? Really?
The Ford Pinto again, or whatever. Cujo, Wolves, Dragon, whatever it is.
Chevy and Buick are both trade names, right? Is a Chevy Buick actually? It's not a thing. It's
no,
like 2.
They are 2 models. They're like brands, like Coca-Cola or Pepsi.
Yeah, it's kind of what I thought after I said it, and I was like, I feel like an idiot. Chevy Impala. That's a thing, right?
That's a specific model of car.
It's a Chevy too, right?
Yes.
An Impala.
Yeah, it is.
Hey.
Fun fact that Lincoln is bringing back suicide doors, which is exciting.
Suicide doors are kind of cool.
So I was kind of disappointed though because
I don't know why, but they just are.
No, I agree. So the fun thing about the old one though, I think it was the old Lincoln Continental in the '60s when it opened up the suicide doors. There was no B pillar. Mm-hmm. But in this one now, there is a B pillar because there's different structural requirements on the car than there was.
It's an important safety feature, as it turns out.
Yeah, as it turns out.
In reducing
smooshing.
Terrible things that happen in T-boning accidents, which are terrible to begin with.
Yeah. So I was kind of bummed that I had
It's not
the B-pillar.
quite as cool as the doors on the DeLorean, but it's close.
Oh, yeah.
It's a little more practical.
Well, it's actually easier to get in and out of, surprisingly enough, because you sort of like just step right out. You don't have to go around the door,
Like under.
So anyway.
Listen, for us short folks, not really a problem.
Well, I meant the suicide door part of it.
Still good.
All right. So anyway, Microscope.
Right.
All right. So drawing this thing down to a close, I suppose, do you prefer this Microscope Explorer to regular Microscope, do you think?
I wouldn't say that, actually. I think it just depends on what you're wanting to get out of it. I think if you were going for broad, if you wanted to run an epic kind of game, like Kurt likes to run the medieval epic games. If you wanted to create a whole history in a low fantasy world with something like that, or even, a whole sci-fi realm, like if you wanted to create the world that Firefly is set in, then I think regular Microscope would be your best bet for that. But if you're wanting something a little bit more concise and focused, then I think Chronicle works well for that. And I think it's absolutely awesome for, if you wanted to explore the origins of a place that's haunted. I think it would work really well for an Orpheus game. I think it would be phenomenal for that.
That'd be cool.
Ancient or well-known artifacts with an ego. I think it would be fantastic for that also. We haven't got to play Union yet, but I could see where that would be really cool for creating like royal or noble families, or any family that's of importance that you see kind of echoing throughout time would be cool. I just think there's a lot of material, and I really think that each one is valuable in its own way.
Right. I just initially, my first thought was, after we got done, when we left, that I thought regular Microscope seemed really cool if you wanted to build an entire setting, or if you wanted to build a world for a novel, right? But this Chronicle and the ones in this Microscope Explorer book felt like if you want to make a game, like not an RPG, but if you want to make a game to play, a campaign or something, that's the one to do, it felt like to me.
There are some interesting other uses for Microscope that are kind of included in the back of here that you may not think of, which I thought was cool. So there were two ideas that were put forth in here about using Microscope when you're GMing that I thought were just really awesome. There's a wealth of them in here, but these were my two favorites. So the first is when a campaign is over, using Microscope from the ending point of the campaign to create an epilogue about where the characters go and what happens. So I think that would be really awesome, especially if you have those characters like you really love and like you don't really want to let them go, but your GM
send them off into the sunset.
Really doesn't want to continue to run this grueling campaign for you. So you can kind of work together to see how things are going to turn out for everybody, which is neat. The other one that was neat is going back and forth between a classic adventure and Microscope. So you kind of you're going through this dungeon or whatever, you're doing your dungeon crawl, and you've come across all of these different things, and you only have time to explore so many things because, whatever, you've only got so many hit points, so much gold, time is of the essence in some fashion. So, but you kind of make note of things that you found interesting during that process, and you go back and use Microscope to kind of do a deep dive on those particular things that you found of interest.
That could be cool.
Yeah, so those are both ideas that I was like, oh, that is neat.
All right, well, do you have anything else about Microscope or Microscope Explorer, the Chronicle or Echoes or any of it?
I guess I should say that second thing is pretty much exactly what we did with this Chronicle game.
Oh, yeah, I guess it is.
We had a campaign, and there was this one artifact, and we were like, boy, it'd be really interesting to know about the origin of this and more about it. Let's make that the theme of this Chronicle.
Right.
So,
right on, yeah.
It worked well.
It's very cool. So, right on. So, yeah, you can always check out Microscope. And like I said, there's a review of it already that we did some time ago. And then Microscope Explorer has these 3 additional sort of ways to play that I think add an awesome new level to the game that you can explore or use regular Microscope if you want still. So they're all awesome different versions of the game, and I think they all have their own individual flavor and what makes them shine in different ways. So right on.
If you have Microscope and you enjoy it, the Microscope Explorer is definitely a worthwhile addition.
I agree 100%. Right on. Well, quick Gunny Geek promo for Pop Xcast, episode 87, Remembering Stan Lee. On November 12th, 2018, the universe as we know it lost a legend. The great Stan Lee passed away at the age of 95. Join us on this very special episode as we give a historical glimpse of his life, his legacy, and share our own stories of the Stan the Man Lee. We discuss Stan's own origin story, and we give an opportunity for fans to join the team PopX and share their own favorite inspiration of their own Stan Lee moment. So check them out. That is PopXcast episode 87, Remembering Stan Lee. All right, I think that'll do it for us. Hopefully you guys will head out and pick up Microscope and use it to improve your entire tables gaming experience, because I think there's a lot to add there to give everybody a shared history of the world that you guys are playing in. Mentioned already that the Best RPG Podcast poll of 2018 should be going up, and we'll link that in the show notes, so you guys should head over there and give us a vote in any other favorite podcast as well. And I think that'll do it for us, and we will see you guys next week.
Thanks for listening. This has been an episode of Just One More Fix. Music has been provided by Kevin MacLeod. You can find him at incompetech.com. You can support us at patreon.com/justonemorefix or follow us on Twitter at Just One More Fix.